Saundra, welcome to the show. So excited to have you here. I am looking forward to talking about sleep and rest and all the good things. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to a chat with you.
Obviously, decorated background. Congrats on all the success. The book, we'll get to that in a moment. But what was the journey for you choosing to base things and write a book around rest? Were you seeing a lot of burnout in patients? Were you seeing it in yourself? I'm sure you did, but what led you to talk about this topic?
Yeah, so I burned out. That was the catalyst. I really wasn't trying to write a book. I was just trying to survive within medicine. Medicine is one of those professions where you are trained to not rest. And so I had to undo a lot of my thinking around rest. I saw rest as what losers did who can't keep up with us high achievers. So I had to reframe that a little bit in my own head. And then there was not enough research really out there. As an internist, I was well studied in sleep and well studied in cortisol deficiency and thyroid disorders and all of these other things. But there was no science about how do you restore when you don't have a medical problem and you're getting good sleep. And that's really where the research on the seven types of rest came from.
So you're busy, you're scrambling, you're running around. I have many friends in the medical profession, so I get it. I get it, but I don't get it. Like I understand busy, but not when like other human beings' lives are on the line, right? That's
Mhm.
I just talk about business, but you're busy enough as it is. Where did you find the time to really dig into this? Were there things that you were seeing in patients over and over again? Were there things that you were seeing in industry? What really allowed you to pull on that string of rest and sleep and all that?
Honestly, I didn't have time. So what ended up happening for myself when I was looking at, okay, I know I'm tired, but I can't figure out how to get better and sleep is not helping me. I started looking at, okay, if I'm exhausted, there's something that's not getting repleted. That's how I looked at it. The same way we would look at like supplements. Someone needs a is deficient in something. So I'm like, I'm deficient in some type of rest. And I just started doing research. I started looking at, okay, I'm using energy in this area. I'm talking to patients. I'm using emotional and social energy. What am I doing to pour back into that type of energy? Then I go to another area and I'm using energy in mentally processing. How am I restoring that? And initially my list was this mega list at the end of each day of I spent this energy. What did I do to pour back in? That list got honed down as I started being really more aware of conversations I was having with patients. They would say something and we do the medical doctor thing, and then I run into my office and I jot something down. It's the same process I think a lot of creatives do when they're creating something. I just didn't know what I was creating. I was
Mm.
basically just trying to figure out how is it that I can be sleeping 8 hours, eating well, doing all these things, and I'm still exhausted? And just trying to figure out how to put the pieces together. It was really a grassroots research project is how it began and just evolved into this other thing. A lot of it was done after hours while I was still exhausted.
So raise his hand. I'm like, okay, I'm sleeping enough, I think. I'm working out enough, that's for sure. Got a trainer, like I'm being guided through it. I'm not killing myself. I'm eating pretty well. What did you see on that list that maybe surprised you or you were like, "Oh, whoa, I never saw that." You're inventorying and I'm asking because I've tried to really
Mhm.
be intentional about managing my energy, managing my schedule, my time, sleep, and all that, et cetera. What were things that maybe you saw there that were like, "Whoa, I didn't realize I was doing this much of this or that much of that or not enough of this?"
Yeah, so over those years, it really honed itself down to 7 specific areas, and that's what ended up being the 7 types of rest. So they're mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. And for myself, when I started looking at these bigger blocks, and they were things that I was seeing that was consistent in my patients, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of profession, they were consistent. I was seeing that these were areas of
Mm,
depletion. I then started looking at myself to think, okay, well, I know I'm using emotional energy because I'm dealing with people's emotions in the ICU, ER, life and death type situations. What am I doing to pour back into that? And then what does that even look like? That's when I realized how clueless I was on how to even resolve some of the areas that I felt like I had a deficit in. And the probably the one that stood out the most to me was the creative rest one. I never thought of myself as a creative. I was I at the time, I wasn't really writing or doing a whole lot of writing, so I never thought of myself as a creative, but then as I did more research, creativity included problem solving. creativity included diagnosing patients. You take symptoms and you take research and science and you try to come up with something new out of that we call a diagnosis. The more I dove into it, the more complicated I saw that rest was, and too many of us had lumped sleep and rest as if they were the same thing. Sleep is a type of rest, but when we lump them into the same thing, it's like we have omitted all of the other types of rest and we put all of our eggs into this one basket, and that basket's gonna fail us every time because it cannot give us creative rest. It cannot give us emotional or social rest or some of these other areas.
I love that. I want to pull on that thread a little bit. You talk about the difference between sleep and rest. Can you unpack that for us? And then I really want to dig into these 7 types of rest. I think that's so interesting. Everything in me says, oh, yes. But what's the difference for you, or what did you find is the difference, or how do you define now the difference between sleep and rest?
Yeah, the easiest way I can define it is to if you're looking at sleep, sleep really just falls into physical rest. And so physical rest has actually two components. It has a passive component, which is sleeping and napping. Then it has an active component, which includes things like yoga and stretching and body ergonomics, how you even use your workstation. And so with sleep, when we look at all of these other areas that aren't part of that physical rest, we have 6 other types of rest that we're needing in addition to that. And unfortunately, our sleep and our rest are closely intertwined together because our failure to rest in some areas, like if you have a mental rest deficit, I'm sure everybody's probably experienced this at least once. You lay down to go to sleep at night and you can't get your brain to shut up. You're thinking all the thoughts, you got all your best ideas in the middle of the night and you're literally processing mentally while you're trying to sleep. A mental rest deficit affects your sleep. A sensory rest deficit, you're high strung, affects your sleep. A lot of these areas, if we don't really focus in and become intentional about restoring in the specific area of the deficit, we continue to have poor sleep and then it just compounds on itself.
I have found myself like this, especially at really time intensive events when I'm hosting workshops, hosting conferences. Like this happens to a lot of folks who are listening to us today. They do a lot of this kind of work. I love being around people. I'm an introvert by nature. I make sure I go to sleep at that event. And it's like, I know I am physically completely exhausted, and I will stay up in bed at the hotel scrolling through Instagram for an hour and a half. And I'm like, what am I doing right now? And I sometimes wonder, does my brain just need to shut off and eat this like candy for a little bit before my body shuts down? Cause there are other times where I've gone straight to bed and I'm getting the full 8 hours, and I'll wake up the next day for day 2 of the workshop and I will feel like I didn't sleep at all. Are those kind of layperson's terms of some of the differentiation between these types of rest? Is that what I'm finding,
It
experiencing?
is, and I love that you
Okay.
said that because I work with a lot of speakers, within my mastermind, and one of the things that, especially introverts, you described it so well because so many people can relate to that, is that when you're on that stage, even if you are being completely transparent, completely authentic, a part of you is pouring out socially to people, even without trying to be in a performance mode. It's just part of it. You're pouring out, you're giving up yourself. And so you're pouring out energy in the social rest area, and most of the time, there's no one to actually pour back into you afterwards. And
Mhm.
the most speakers, some of them I understand actually love the accolades and all of that and the thank yous, but oftentimes introverts tend to not necessarily be filled up with that. They actually did the speaking because of something more deeper. It was purpose driven more so than it was accolade or acknowledgement driven. And so the accolades aren't really filling them back up. What would actually fill them back up is being around someone who is life giving, someone who actually speaks to them without it having been action related, someone who actually can say so like a friend. That's really at the bulk of social rest is when you introverts doesn't and being introverted doesn't mean you don't like people. It means that lots of people are draining to you and small close relationships tend to be more life-giving to you. And so after a big speaking event, one of the things that actually helps me rest better and actually get to sleep quicker is having a quick call either with my spouse or a girlfriend or someone where they don't really care what kind of talk I just gave. They're not even asking too many questions about it. We're just having conversation and I'm being poured into in a more close-knit, authentic relationship.
Gosh, I love that you say this because this really actually hits very much home for me. And I know there are others, many others who are listening who have gone through this. That is me. I can speak, I can do the event, I can host masterminds. Like, I love it. And there is a special depth of loneliness or this malaise after it's done. You know the feeling as a
Yes,
presenter, as a communicator. Everyone
absolutely.
shakes your
Yeah.
hand. You walk back to that room alone, especially if you're on the road alone, and all the people are gone. And I'm just like, wow, this for some reason just does not feel good. And then I started to withdraw from those opportunities, even when I do webinars, like you're presenting, even online. Like then you shut off the Zoom call and it's like me and my dog, right? Or it's like just you and you're in solitude in this room delivering a presentation to hundreds of people. And I know a lot of people struggle with this. We have a running policy in my mastermind group. Hey, if you do a webinar, you call me after you're done. I don't care what's going on. If you don't have anyone to talk to, you better call me because I don't know everyone's promotional schedules. But I
Mhm.
have felt that many times. You've mentioned a couple of these different types of rest. So physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual. Can you unpack these a little bit more, each of them? Because I think
Yeah.
this is so valuable to everybody. Well, me especially, I'm hearing this. Can you unpack these a little bit for us?
Yeah, so physical I described a little bit with the passive and the active form. So next would be mental. And so a mental rest deficit, the easiest way I can describe it is as I mentioned with the bed. You can't turn your head off. Some people oftentimes will have this if they notice, let's say for instance, you go into the grocery store and you can't recall 3 items and you're thinking, I don't have dementia. Why can't I remember 3 items? Oftentimes it can be related to a mental rest deficit. We've trained our brains to not retain information. We have 15 screens open at one time. So if it's not in screen one, it's in screen 10. You don't have to memorize anything. However, at night, when we're ruminating over the stuff, it's the same process we use to remember a spelling test or a science test. Rumination is studying. So even if you're ruminating on something like your to-do list the next day, your brain is processing it as if you're studying. So it actually holds on to that information at the expense of you not sleeping. It's no, there must be a test coming. So I'm going to hold on. The flip side of that, when you're in that grocery store trying to recall those 3 items, it's open up the screen. I don't know. Where is it housed at? I don't see it. And so we have to really retrain our brain a little bit. And so mental rest tactics can include things like mindfulness activities. It can include things like doing a brain dump at the end of the day. So rather than trying to keep that to do list in your head, you jot it down so that your brain recognizes, oh, it's safe. It's in somewhere where I can recall it, and it won't hold on to that. Spiritual rest, I don't usually go into a lot of depth with that because it's so different for so many people. But at the very core, of spiritual rest is the need that we all have for belonging, for purpose, to have a life that has meaning and value. And so, whether you experience that in a faith based type situation, or if you're experiencing that in a situation where you have a cause, maybe, or a community where you feel that connectivity and that belonging and that acceptance. Oftentimes in workplaces, where it's just where I do a lot of my work currently with corporations, we focus on like the empathy aspect, the human spirit aspect of spirituality because it's needed for people to feel as if their voice is heard, as if they are validated. Emotional rest is the one that I was most deficient in during my journey. That's what actually the issue was. And emotional rest is the rest we experience when we have the ability to be authentic about what we're feeling, when we don't have to carry emotional labor or professional emotional labor. And I'll explain that just a tiny bit because with emotional rest, with my own example as a physician, if I'm in the ICU with someone, sometimes these are people I actually know. I live in a small town, so it's not like it's a stranger or just a chart, it's a friend sometimes. And so it's not beneficial for me or for the patient or the family for me to bust out in tears, even if that's what I'm emotionally feeling. You lock it down, you deal with business, and you move on. But I still need to deal with those emotions. If you're in customer service, if you're a consultant and you're dealing with clients that are jerks sometimes, or even a coach dealing with a client that's a jerk, you can't professionally just lash out at them. There's a professional emotional labor that a lot of us carry but those emotions still need to be expressed at some time. So whether that's a counselor, a therapist, a pastor, a good friend, a spouse, there needs to be some place where you can just be real, raw, and authentic about your emotions. And the difference is you don't want to do trauma dumping. That's why a lot of us don't share our feelings. We fear we're going to trauma dump on people. But trauma dumping is when you are sharing like all the details without actually getting to the vulnerability part where you share what you felt. So trauma dumping is me telling my husband about the accident that came in and what the kids looked like and what the car looked like after the accident and all the gore. Emotional rest is when I say, I felt completely powerless to help these people. I felt like, why am I here? This is ridiculous. A bazillion years of medicine and we can't save somebody after whatever. That felt more vulnerable.
Mm,
That requires a little bit more of myself, and that's actually where the rest is at with that emotional rest. Emotional rest is it's interesting you say that because I think a lot of introverts, and I consider myself an introvert as well, is that misconception that we just love being alone, don't like to be around people ever. I do enjoy my alone time, but we have to be but when we look at the reality of our current world, we have a loneliness epidemic. A lot of us work from home, especially if you're an entrepreneur. You're oftentimes working from home with a small team. And so with the social rest rather, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that we have to look at all of our relationships. Some Most of our relationships are socially draining. They are pulling from our social energy. So they're people who need things from us. They have demands on our times, our talents, our abilities. Then we have to look at who are the people in our life who don't need anything from us, who are actually just life-giving. They're our friends. They're the people who pour back into us. They don't have any demands on us in any way. Most of the time, the majority of your relationships are going to be the socially draining ones. They're people who are pulling something from you or needing something from you. And so, even with introverts or extroverts, we need to make sure that we have some relationships where we don't feel as if the has demands on us.
I love that. You know who comes to my mind? My buddy Henry. We're very different in our work lives, but he lives a 12-minute walk from me. We've known each other since we were 11. We're about 3 weeks apart, and I was like, "I just need to hang out with this guy sometimes on the weekends because we just bum out, watch the NBA or whatever." He just never asked me to do anything. I never asked him to do anything. We just the worst is, "Hey, what do you wanna eat tonight?" And, like, I'm realizing that it's so important and not like, even my personal situation. I love the people I work with. I love the
Mhm.
people I coach. I also realize I love what you said about carrying that emotional labor. Like, you mentioned you run mastermind groups. I sometimes joke with my mastermind. I feel like I run emotional support groups for entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of energy you take on. I just need to be around people that I just, like, brained up with. You alluded earlier to creative rest. I wanna get to that, and also sensory rest. Can you unpack is sensory overload with screens? Can you unpack that a little bit for us too?
It does include that, so it definitely includes all our gadgets, but it also includes everything else. It includes if you're a speaker or someone who travels for business like both of us do. It includes the plane where you're hearing the droning all for 7, 8, 10 hours, wherever you're going. It includes if you're working in an office space and you're hearing the elevator dinging or conversations in the other room. It also includes when you're actually in the auditorium and you're hearing all the background hum from the monitors and all that other stuff that happens when you're speaking on a stage. And so we have to be aware that although most of us have learned how to tune out sensory input, we ignore it as best we can. Even the ignoring of it is using energy. Our brain has to filter it for it to even be ignored. And so that filtering process is draining sensory energy. And so a lot of us spend quite a bit of time in sensory overload. And the response that we have psychologically to sensory overload is irritation, agitation, rage, or anger. It's the reason why road rage is worse in the evening and not in the morning. We've had a sensory reprieve because sleeping does give you some sensory rest because you're shut down for a little bit. And by the evening, you've dealt with all the noise pollution in the world. And now you're like, well, I'm not biting off the person's head at Starbucks because they put oat milk and I wanted almond milk because you had all you can take. You've gotten to the end of yourself sensory wise. So sensory rest is really downgrading some of the sensory input. A big one is just turning off the notifications as much you can. I get it. We all have to have usually you need to have your text messages on and your phone still on, but do you really need to have every message from social media pushed to you the second it comes through? Probably not. So trying to turn down as much of that as possible and then safeguarding some things in your life, like having your computer dim the light when it's 6 o'clock, or even having some smart, what do they call it? Smart plugs in your home so that your lights in your home actually dim at certain periods. So you can start to get your circadian system aware, hey, I'm supposed to be tuning down right now, not revving up.
Yeah, I don't know why it took me so long to find this setting on my iPhone where they have the focus or do not disturb, but you can set the one up for personal, and the only people there are only like 3 people who can text me during the day where I'll see it. I'll leave my text message open on my computer, but if I'm not there, I won't see them. It's in case of emergency, and so just I've I've broken up with my phone, and a lot I don't keep social media on my phone. It's just stuff like that. I love that what you said about just the hum. I just got back from a trip. I'm surprised how long I keep these AirPods in my earbuds, in my ears, but I turn on the noise cancellation. I play a Spotify playlist of spa music. People might be like, Mike is totally zenned out, but that's how I just realized now that you said that. I'm just blocking out one of
Mhm.
the channels. I want to pull on this a little bit. Creative rest. You're a creative, you're a speaker, you're an author. Same here. A lot of folks who are also listening are of the same ilk. What have you discovered about creative rest?
That was probably the one I get the most feedback from people when I have an assessment at restquiz.com, and when people take the assessment, they find which of the 7 they're most efficient in. So many people will say, "This was it. This was the one I had no clue was even a thing to try to get." And at the core, creative rest, it is the need we all have to be inspired, to have our creative wells filled back up. And the research, there isn't a whole lot of research out about it. It was one of those things that really took quite a bit of digging and piecing together. But the research, most of it went back to nature. A lot of people who have this comment that I just feel more restored when I'm around bodies of water, or when I'm up in the mountains, or when I'm watching looking at flowers or whatever. That is what creative is. It's the energy we experience when we allow ourselves to appreciate beauty, created beauty. And so whether that's natural created beauty like the things I mentioned, or man-made creative beauty like art or music or theater, it it allows creative energy to be birthed inside of us. I often look at it as the kinda like childlike awe and wonder that then makes something birth inside of you, new creativity inside of you.
I don't know what it was like for you when you were writing your book. I remember it was just a long slog through, right? And I remember I was just expending so much creative energy. I was writing, and then I remember hitting a wall multiple times. I was like, I want to stop. I need to go read something. I just need to I almost felt like I needed to eat. Like, I was doing all of this creative writing and output, and I was like, "I'm not eating anything. I'm not reading anything inspiring. I'm not hearing a different tone of voice. I'm not reading different phrases." I'm enough of a word nerd where when I read something really well written, it
Mhm.
replenishes me. So I love what you said there about man-made and even in nature, and I gotta manufacture a lot of that because I live in New Jersey. We have no nature here. I love this, Sandra, but I can hear somebody just right now on the podcast and they're going, okay, this all sounds great, but I've got 2 crazy kids. I've got a spouse this, I've got work that. They don't care at all. I'm being overrun. And I can't drop any of these balls that I'm juggling. What do we say to those folks where they're like, mental rest sounds great, emotional rest sounds great, social rest definitely sounds great. How do I get away from these people, or how do I find some way to soothe the hurt, the pain, the overwhelm? What would you say to those folks who are in that space?
Yeah, I would say I get you, I am you. That's really where I started at. I don't have time for rest. I wrote that sentence actually in the book. I don't have time for this, but I had to get it to be able to have time for life. And so one of the things I find is that oftentimes when people say that, it's because they're thinking they need to carve out some big block of time. They're thinking vacation, they're thinking sabbatical, they're thinking I need to find 2 hours of me time in the middle of every day. No, That's not realistic in my world, and I know it's probably not in yours either. Really, it's looking at what are small restorative practices you can put in the middle of your busy day. Like we were talking about creative rest. One of the great studies that I loved from that was it looked at people who said water actually made them feel creatively inspired. It looked at their MRI of their brain after they looked at the actual ocean, after they looked at a picture of the ocean, and after they'd looked at, like, colors of the ocean, like the aquamarines and the blues, and then after they looked at, like, flowers and grass. No activity when they looked at the flowers and the grass, but all of the other 3, whether it was the actual ocean, the picture, or the color, all had positive activity in the brain in that area of creative sparking. And so what that tells me is something as simple as having an accent wall in your home, which is a one-time thing that is ongoing creative inspiration. Having your lock screens on your phone or your computer switching up on you so that you get surprised because Bora just jumped up and now it's Hawaii and now it's something else. And so you're seeing all of these things that are inspiring you. I think we have to realize that restorative practices don't have to be long. They just need to be intentional for the type of rest deficit that you have.
I love this. Okay, so you'd laugh because if you could see to my left right now, I got a big screen TV in here, like one of those 90-inch ones, and all it plays all day are videos on YouTube from the ocean or the beach. It's 9-hour
I love
videos.
it.
So my algorithm is just full of nature videos. I was like, man, why don't I just move to Florida again? Why don't I go back? What am I doing? Okay, this makes me feel a lot less weird about some of my I'm gonna call them restorative practices. I love that. Thank you for that term. This is incredible. I want to actually shift gears a little bit here, and on some of the thought leadership pieces. Your book has sold really well. You got over 1,200 reviews on Amazon. So congrats again on all that success. But you had mentioned right before we jumped on, like you wrote this book and it started a new business. And I want to shift a few gears here because that's like the dream for so many folks out there. And I'm curious as to what that process was like. Did it shock you? Was it something that was intentional? Do you see yourself now more doing this and getting away from the practice of seeing patients? Like, what was that process for you like?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't intentional. I absolutely love clinical medicine, so I had no intention of going anywhere. But I gotta be honest with you, it was one of those things where in the process of writing my book, I worked with someone who I this was my 3rd book, so in the process of writing it, I already knew as an author that the importance of marketing and the importance of list building, and I had not done such a great job of that with my first 2 books. So with this book, I specifically was looking at how can I build into the actual book itself list building and serve people and actually help them get the book even more. And that's really where that whole rest quiz came from was the creation of, okay, I'm going to create this quiz because this is the question my patients are asking me. So I'm sure other people are going to ask it too. And I'm going to make it so that they have to give their email address to get the result. I'm going to actually mention the quiz, chapter 3 of the book. So if they're reading, they're going to go there. And at the end of the book, I'm going to mention it again in case they didn't obey the first time and find out what their need before they actually keep reading. And what I didn't realize is that because my thinking was, I wanna be able to connect with my readers. What I didn't realize was my readers were then gonna go tell everybody they knew, "Hey, I took this quiz and it told me what was wrong with me. You need to go take it too." And that started his own avalanche of PR. All of a sudden, TEDx is calling me and asking me to come to headline their Atlanta event where I was the opening speaker, and they based the whole event around rest and reset. Next thing I know, CNN Health is reaching out and say, "Hey, we saw this TEDx video that you did that now has over a 500,000 views." And it was just like this ongoing situation. And the thing that's been consistent is that people continue to refer it out to other people because they start feeling better, and then they're like, "You need to go do this." Once you can identify the type of rest deficit you have, you will actually have more energy to do all of these other things you wanna do. And it's really been interesting just to watch how something I did for marketing primarily, it was for marketing and to help my reader, the person I was concerned with, to be able to understand the book better, actually has become what pushed the book over into a business.
I love that. So the marketing side of me nerds out about that stuff. First, kudos for writing a good book. That was one of the best pieces of advice I got from a friend. I know it sounds so common sense, but he was like, "Hey, so the best thing you can do for your book success is just write a good book." And then he was like, "If you market the book, people will know about it, and then a couple months later, you'll have another launch. It's just going to be led by the people who read it the first time and tell everybody about it." And that still happens 3 some odd years later. I still get DMs on Instagram all the time. "Hey, just started your book." I'm like, "Cool. I guess I did something right, and you apparently did too. Clearly, you did." When all these speaking engagements started coming your way, was that kind of the first step that you took towards generating revenue outside of what you were doing with medicine? Where you just like, "Okay, I'm gonna go be a paid speaker. I'm gonna go bring this book and this framework into companies. I'm gonna coach people." What was that initial kind of first, second, third step for you when the book started doing so well?
Yeah, the first step was the invites that started coming in for speaking. I didn't have a one sheet. I didn't have a speaker page.
Mm,
I was literally had a clinical site. People were calling my medical practice where I'm in a group practice with 10 doctors. So it was really bizarre, honestly. But people started calling, asking about speaking. So I started to have to figure out what exactly I was doing with that. What I noticed was when you're in clinical practice, you can't really be on a call schedule and be out speaking. It doesn't really work like that. So I was starting to have to really make decisions about what I could accept and what I couldn't accept. And then when the invites started to become not just can you come to my women's retreat, but can you come to Salesforce and teach our whole company kind of thing. It's okay. This is not that. I started getting invites for some just gigantic companies and wanting to do more work and and I had to make that decision. So I made the decision that, okay, I'm gonna step out of medicine. It was 2019 is when I made that decision. I stepped outside of medicine without really I don't have an MBA. I don't really know anything about business. I know what I know about medicine and people and well-being and work-life integration and those things that I'd been researching. And I just started reaching back out to some of those companies about consulting. It's like, how can I and really it came from a place of wanting to still practice medicine, but practice in corporations in a way that was able to actually help me instead of seeing 150 people a day at the most, being able to see 1,000 people in one day by working with a small group within a corporation. And so I went about it the same way. It's like, how can I help your team be stronger in this area? How can which part of your department you feel is most burned out? Starting asking questions where you truly are trying to serve and money follows service. That's the best advice I can give anybody. Money follows a true servant leadership type heart when you're in entrepreneurship. The person who loves most gets most is what I'm finding. And so the more I approach it in that regard, it I started getting referrals and I couldn't keep up with the business. So at that point, I had to expand, I had to scale, I had to start to really becoming a business more so than just a solopreneur.
yeah, I love that. I love these opportunities opening for you. I often say it's very difficult to meet someone who feels truly fulfilled in life if they're not happy at work, because work takes up so much of our lives. And if when you meet people who love what they do for a living, yeah, they're tired, they're stressed out, but they've at least got that. Whereas most of the folks who are working a day, they're not. It's not what they really envision them doing, right? And to be able to meet them right there at their own pace in their own space because you've got a book, because you're creating content, I just think that's incredible. I am so happy for your success. I wish I met you earlier. I can see where I've tried to find those pockets and fought to reclaim a little bit of my own sanity and my own rest in this world. I want to close with this. One of the things that you hear from people is that they feel like rest is a luxury. You work with a lot of high achievers, I know, right? And we are weird. Like we are our own worst boss. I'm the worst boss I've ever had. I love what I do, but I'm the worst boss I've ever had. I don't know what that is or where that comes from. Uh, just recently, I shelled out a bunch of money to go take a family trip, like a legitimate family trip. I can afford this trip. I've spent way more money on business stuff. And I'm like, no, this is ridiculous. We're going to go halfway across the world. Like, this is a waste of money. And then I catch myself. I'm like, what am I going to remember when I'm 90? That I went to this trip with my sister, my brother-in-law, like our family, like, or that I saved the $5,000. What do you have any insight for us crazy people? I know you're one of us too. Like, where does that come from? What would you say to that?
I think like myself, as I mentioned, when I started this journey, I was like, rest is for weak people, and I'm not weak. It's if there was a pushback. And so I get it. I definitely get it. And when I'm working with corporations and CEOs and vice presidents, I get it. There's some pushback initially to that because our culture has really taught most of us that hard work is where we win. And we have a fantastic work ethic and zero rest ethic. And so it's so one-sided that it's if you just keep working and one of the things you mentioned family, one of the things I talk about in my book, Sacred Rest, is a story with my son. I'm a science geek if you hadn't figured it out yet. And my son is a bit of one too. And he was doing this project on bees. And so when he came home and said, "Hey, I got this project on bees," his like biology crazy mama was like, "Yeah, let's go figure out what bees do." And so we were looking up the story about bees. And the more and it was in the process of me writing the book that he was doing this. At one point, we were watching this movie and it was talking about how one bee in the hive, if it gets disoriented, disrupts the entire hive. And I was like, wow. And the more and then I started to think this thought, I am so much like this honeybee. I am buzzing around doing all this stuff. And if I get burned out and overwhelmed and discombobulated with my ability to not be burned out, then I just start disrupting everything in my path, my family, my relationships, my finances, my health. Everything starts unwinding, and we see it in people's lives. And I made that decision a decision that day that I keep in my mind often. I don't want to be so busy doing activity, be like that bee who's making all this honey, doing all this stuff that other people are enjoying, and it's so sweet. But I don't actually stop long enough to taste the sweetness in my own life. So that's what I would encourage. Anyone who's out there and you are killing it, you are succeeding, you have the house, the kids, the car, all of the things, and you're like, why am I still not satisfied? You're that honeybee. You're making all of this sweet stuff, but you're not stopping long enough to enjoy it. If nothing else, rest is permission to actually enjoy your life. And so it improves your productivity, it increases your creativity, it actually helps you to live longer because your cortisol levels go down. I could go on and on, but I think we have to realize we have to also have a rest ethic if we want to be the best version of ourselves.
I love that. Sandra, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this is going to impact thousands of people. You already have. And now in my world, thank you for stepping in and carving some time out. We know you're very busy, but this has been incredible. Thank you so much. Congrats on the book. And everyone go to restquiz.com, put all the links to the book in the show notes. Thank you and have a restful rest of your day.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.